Welcome back, guys. Today I'm going to talk about two Mexican horror films from the early 1930s. You've got La Llorona and Phantom of the Monastery. Now, La Llorona was the earliest release, and Phantom of the Monastery was released a year later. I would say that Phantom of the Monastery is by far the better film. But I'll start with La Llorona because it's the earliest film, and then I'll go to Phantom of the Monastery. So the La Llorona was directed by Ramon Peon, and who apparently had a good career in Mexico. Mexican film started up in the 30s. There were films before that, but as an industry it really got going in the 30s with the coming of sound. You get a lot of this information from Kim Newman, Stephen Jones, because they have commentaries on La Llorona and Phantom of the Monastery. So they were starting a film industry in Mexico. You got a few films that were actually remakes of Universal films. Universal did Spanish-speaking versions of films at night while they were shooting the normal versions by day. So you have a Spanish Dracula, which is actually better than the American Dracula. But also they did their own versions. Because Mexico and a lot of places in America have Spanish-speaking communities. So they were just catering towards these communities. Instead of forcing them to have to sit through the English version, they did a Spanish version. So these films that were made for Mexico could also be released in America to the Spanish sections of the society. So they cater towards that too. And it means that Spanish is one of the bigger languages in the world. So if you have a Spanish version of anything, you can show it around lots of places. So, La Llorona is the kind of early version of the Spanish-speaking horror films from Mexico. It is pretty good, but it's not amazing. Phantom of the Monastery is brilliant. This one, pretty good. This is 70 minutes long, and it's kind of an anthology film. It's one of the early anthology films, but it does have a wraparound story that's actually... They're all about La Llorona. So you basically get a story that starts in for the film is modern day Mexico, where a rich family's having a birthday party for the child, but the grandpa's a bit worried because there's a curse on the family because of stuff that ancestors did years and years ago, and they're a bit worried that it's going to come down to them as well. So within that situation, you get flashbacks to these other stories that are in books, so they read the books and get the stories. So the first one is set in Spain, where this seducer has gotten this woman pregnant and she's given birth, and he's not acknowledging this is his son because this woman's not good enough for him to marry to get himself up into society. And basically, tragedy ensues because this guy cannot play fair with the woman or the child or anyone around him. He is just a scumbag. He is wonderfully awful. It's one of those ones where you enjoy watching someone be so horrible in a film because it is entertaining as hell. Just how awful they make this guy. Just a total hypocrite in every possible way. He's just trying to marry himself into power. So it's one of those things, he gets everything he deserves. That's the kind of simple logic of these films. Is men are awful. In this film, men are awful. Generally. Apart from the hero who saves stuff. But for most of the historical stuff, men are awful. So you get that story in Spain, the tragedy. I'm not going to go into all the details of it all. There's some wonderful stuff in there. It's a bit long, this section, but it pays off when you get to the conclusion. There's some wonderful... It's very kind of operatic and odd, and I enjoyed that section probably most of all in the film, which is funny because in the commentary, Kim Newman says that was the worst bit of the film, and that was the best bit of the film for me. So I just had a blast watching this guy be totally awful. We'll go back to the reality of the modern day, and you start to see the plotting happen around the child. Then you get the second story. You get a kidnapping that goes wrong. You get a second story that tells what happened with the but the guy's both from Spain. I'm not even trying to pronounce his name because I got it absolutely wrong. I've a dry throat. If a cold, it does not help try to pronounce difficult names with a cold. So it's the Spaniards in Mexico and all the stuff they're doing to the locals. And again, tragedy ensues and La Llorona's curse continues. And then we come back to the modern day and more things happen. And the conclusion occurs. La Llorona is an enjoyable film. The problem is you kind of see it all. In the modern story, you kind of see everything coming. Like, I spotted who the villain was, like, instantly. And I'd be surprised if you didn't spot it, because I just was like, well, that's a villain. There's some red herrings, but it's obviously someone you think, that's a villain. So, they try their best to sing in other directions, but it's like, nah, it's pretty obvious who it is. It doesn't ruin it, it's just that I found the modern story to be kind of a bit duller than the flashbacks. The flashbacks were way more fun. I just wish there was more about those. And he spent all the time in that and ignored the modern story, because the modern story is kind of boring. But it's enjoyable. There's still some hammy acting. It's fun. But it is much more of like a traditional family values rather than the crazy bad behaviour that leads to the tragedy of La Llorona. Which is what you kind of want. You want the villains to be awful so the tragedy becomes much bigger. Which is what you get in the flashbacks, which you don't get in the modern section. But it's still an enjoyable film, but it's not a film I would jump back to very often. I'd probably watch the flashback scenes more than the modern stuff. I might watch it for the flashbacks. But it's still enjoyable. But I'd wait for a sale for this one. Now, Phantom of the Monastery is different. Now, this is directed by, Fernando de Fuentes. This is a real proper horror film. This is a really good one. If you're going for horror, you want a good horror film for this time, for Halloween period, get this one. It's good. But it's an old-fashioned one. It's about characters in a creepy situation. It's a ghost story. It's not a slasher movie. It's a 30s ghost story. Basically, about this couple and their friend. So there's basically two men and a woman. There's tension between them all because the woman kind of has the hots for the friend and the husband's a bit weak. And they get lost, end up in a monastery that's out of town. So they end up staying in the monastery that night with the monks. And lots of weird things are going on. And there's a room that's been locked off with a cross in front of it. And there's a story about a doomed guy who stayed with the monks, who had a tragic past. And there's lots of weird stuff going on with the monks. And you can't quite tell, what's reality and what's not, and are they dreaming it or they're not. And it's just wonderful, the whole thing, the whole atmosphere of it all. Even though it's been ripped off enough that you'll probably figure it out, it's still enjoyable. The characters are fun. The characters here are much better than they are in La Llorona. They're much more complicated, flawed, much more approachable. Like in La Llorona, there are a lot of characters were either the villains who were a lot of fun, or they were stodgy, people to look up to, and they're boring. This one, everyone's flawed and interesting. So no matter who you go to in the story, you're always going to be in good hands because there's always something going on. Even the kind of weakling husband isn't as simplistic as you actually think, and he makes sense a lot of the time. So it's like so it's not like he's a shaggy kind of weakling. It's much more he's just a person with concerns because you should have those concerns, And maybe his wife and his friend are a bit too carefree with the danger. So it's got a wonderful sense of everybody makes sense, everybody's making mistakes, and there's a creepy thing going on. And it's just a joy to watch this one. This one is the longer film, but it needs a length. And it's got a sense of enjoyment of the craft because the camera moves in interesting ways. The director seems to be enjoying himself. The cast seems to be enjoying themselves. Everyone seems to be liking this project they're shooting. They seem to have been having fun with the project. Like, everyone seems to be giving it their all. Where Llorona, it felt it was a studio project. People were trying the hardest, but it was a project that was designed. It was kind of something that was a product. And this one, it feels like, yeah, it's a product to make money, but it says that people made it really enjoyed what they're doing. And we really enjoy playing with this story that's kind of loose enough for people to do little things with. And it's solid enough so there's always a direction, you're always going down a direction towards a conclusion. But it gives everybody something to do. So, it's wonderful. Again, it has a commentary with Kim Newman and Stephen Jones, and it has one of the extras as well, some talking about mixing films. Both these films are worth watching, but this is the one I would definitely say this is worth full price. Well, the La Llorona is, as I say, it could be you get it out on sale quite easily. But Phantom of the Monastery I would definitely recommend seeing. It is a really good example of a 1930s horror film. It really works. It works in the same way as like the really good 30s Universal films work. It's just like good atmosphere, good actors, a good situation. You know, the way James Whale did his films in the 30s, how they were all good. So that it's not James Whale, but it's that sense of the people making this are really enjoying what they're doing. So that's both of those fiction films. I hope this video interests you. As you can see, I was trying not to spoil too much. I gave away stuff that I thought was needed, but I was trying to avoid giving too much away. So that's me for now. I'll see you later. Bye.